Recorded live at the center of the earth. This is Robots from Tomorrow.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is a man not just of his time, but several others as well. When he's not recreating 17th century English civil warfare, he spreads the gospel of the galaxy's greatest comic as the now brand manager of Rebellion 2000 AD. But it's in his particular role as author of the book I Am the Law, How Judge Dredd Predicted Our Future, that brings him here today. It melds comics history with political and law enforcement scholarship to show us how the comics of the 20th century about a lawman in the 22nd century showed us what was in store for us in the 21st, and deserves to be on the comic syllabi and fan bookshelves for years to come. It's been almost 10 years since he helped Mike and I start the Multiver-City One weekly review column over at Multiver-City Comics, and I can't think of a better person to write this book or talk about this subject. He's Michael Molcher, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show today. Mike, how you doing?
I'm really well. Thank you for such a generous introduction. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you. And it has been like a decade, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've been doing the weekly reviews of 2000 AD, which is surely some kind of record.
I'm going to say it is. It certainly felt like it. When Mike pitched it, it was, late 2013. Our first prog was 1850. So it was the Rob Williams, Henry Flint Titan. That's a hell of a kickoff. But now you have gone from PR droid to brand manager. Congratulations. What does that mean?
Well, it means more work, is what it means. It's everything plus a bit more of a kind of strategic, expansive take on things. So including things like licensing, merchandising, brand awareness. Brand is one of those words in kind of PR circles that can mean a multitude of things. In our case, it's mostly about kind of reaching new audiences, and at the same time as kind of curating and cultivating and protecting our 2000 AD 2000's reputation and legacy. It's about moving it on into new audiences and new outlets and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot more work, a much bigger kind of expansive role. But I mean, I've been there for 12 years now.
Yeah,
it was about time for
for a promotion,
an upgrade. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Once your material was really available to be viewed and purchased digitally, did that help bring down some barriers in your job?
Some. I mean, ultimately, the Rebellion decided to concentrate on having its own app, rather than necessarily going out through like Comixology and some of the other third-party ones, and that allows us to have much more of a feel of how people are reacting to our stuff, and the reach of it. But at the same time, it's getting people to download it. It's getting them to look at it on a regular basis, and ultimately, one of the great challenges is that, and we're talking about the North American market here. The North American market just does not have the experience with weekly comics that the British market, and to an extent the European market, has always had. So I think sometimes the frequency can get in the way, and also I think an awful lot of the vast majority of our readers still prefer print. And getting that into the North American market and getting it into people's hands is a huge challenge. Even when things go right, you're asking people to take a gamble on titles that they might not be necessarily as au fait with. So it's a constant battle. Digital helps, and it particularly helps when there's a title that, you know, thanks to my work, people are excited about. So you know, you can immediately go, well, it's available to read now. You know, and they don't have to wait for it to come out through Diamond. They don't have to wait 6 months for it to be delivered on a boat from Liverpool. So yeah, there's still plenty to be done, and there's some exciting stuff coming up in the future as regards our digital strategy. Again, another part of my new role is you know, thinking about this stuff and seeing what can work in the future. And you know, the last 12 months have been a really sobering time for digital comics, and a salient lesson in the nature of monopolies.
Turns out they're not great. You know, no. I swear we're going to talk about your book. I swear, but since I somehow led us on this tangent, I do want to mention that the latest book / issue of The Best of 2000 AD, which is volume 2, just came out this week. One of the things these do is, I think one of the best ways to experience 2000 AD is to get more than one strip at once, to go from one to the other to the other to the other. This is like a 144 whatever page prog. What went into the assembling of these volumes?
Well, I mean, the shout out has to go to my colleague Owen Johnson, who's been the driving force behind The Best of 2000 AD. He originally came to the company to put together our 40th birthday celebrations, coming up 6 years ago now. And his role has developed into dealing with sales and talking to our distributors and being in charge of making sure things run as smoothly as they can and people can find this stuff. So it's a really key role, and this was something that's been his baby, and it very nearly became a casualty of the pandemic. So originally it was going to be, and you know, I understand the problems with this term, a monthly floppy series, and unfortunately it got put on hiatus when the pandemic hit, and it's come back as these 200-page graphic novels, which are coming out every quarter for the next year. And you know, I've been there to see him tying himself into the knots of of trying to hone this, you know, and really make like what is the absolute A-grade material that's going to get people into it. And so often conversations about the best of 2000 AD are conversations about the past. You know, and we must dismiss that in any way, shape, or form, because it's, you know, it's brilliant stuff. But it can't just, a collection like this can't just be, here's stuff from 40 years ago. It's got to be a mix of the current stuff. And you know, I genuinely think, and I realize that I'm paid to say this, but I think the last 15 years have been a true modern golden age. For 2000 AD, you know, some of the best strips we've ever published have come out in that period. And what the best of shows is that breadth of time and quality. That it's not just a nostalgic product; it is a vital current product. And you know, there's stuff in 2000 AD which, to be frank, if it was coming out through Image or Boom, you know, would be lauded as some of the best comics you can read. But because we have a legacy reputation as like this British thing, and it's an anthology, and you know, it's difficult to get hold of and all this and the other, it doesn't necessarily get, and you know, part of my job is trying to break through that. And one of the nice things about the Multiver-City columns is that helps punch through and say to people, you know, this is something that's vital. So, you know, in that first collection, you've got classic Judge Dredd, you've got modern Judge Dredd, you've got Brink, which is still like just absolutely stunning science fiction comics. You know, it kind of, for my money, and I know Andy Diggle will probably hunt me down and kill me for saying this. The Expanse, the Brink Out Expanse is the Expanse. You know, it's absolutely fantastic. And a series such as The Out, another Dan, we need to clone Dan Abnett fairly soon. You know, that's another fantastic series.
Yeah.
But he even stuff like kind of like the legacy series, like The Fall of Dead World, which is Keck Dovey and Dave Kendall, which plugs into the history of the Dark Judges from Judge Dredd. You know, and there's such a great mix of stuff. You know, even something like Proteus Vex, which the first collection came out last year by Michael Carroll and Henry Flint and Jake Lynch. Brilliant, wonderful, great to read comics, and it's really interesting what you say, because of course 2000 AD has always been an anthology, and again coming back, anthologies are not really something that's gained a lot of traction in the American market. No. You know, and as a consequence, I think that there is a resistance there, because you know, in an issue of 2000 AD, you only getting 5 or 6 pages of story. But the frequency makes up for that. So, you know, something like Best of 2000 AD perfectly plugs into that by saying, you know, there's lots to enjoy in here. And if this strip isn't your favorite thing, the next strip will be.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, and you get Alan Moore and Ian Gibson's Halo Jones in that first collection. You know, you get Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill's Nemesis the Warlock in the second collection. So it's the meat and potatoes of the best of 2000 AD, but also just, I think, demonstrates the range of it.
Yeah, and there are, you know, multiple volumes, but you can get a complete read sort of in each volume. Like the Anderson Shambhala is, I believe, entirely collected like in the first one,
it's the first one. It's the complete story,
which I haven't read. So I was like, okay, I'm here for this. Ian Coolbard and Arthur Branson in the same book, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Okay. We are, 24 hours or so out from the first stop in your signing tour. Did you think you'd have a signing tour for a book?
No, I never thought I'd write a book, to be honest with you. It's really weird. And you know, it's having a signing tour is something that I put together with Jess Gofton, who is Rebellion Fiction's publicist. So she deals with the Solaris novels and the Rebellion, the other Rebellion titles. And it's just kind of, to be honest with you, it's an excuse to go to some of my favorite places and see some of my favorite people, and also, you know, maybe sign an odd book or two.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's all quite surreal. I having spent a career writing about other people and publicizing other people, for the first time, it's something that I've done, and that's you know, that's very strange.
The image I had in my head was like you going up to the stage and having, I don't know why there would be this many chairs, but like, let's say 4 or 5 chairs up on the stage, and you immediately like sit on like the far left or the far right, and they're like, no, you're in the middle, right? Because you're usually like the moderator for these things, so you're off to the, you know, as we're off to the side, and you're like, no, this one's for you. We saved the, you know. The thing. You wrote the words for this book. It is illustrated with Dredd art from throughout the decades. The cover, though, is a hell of a cover. Talk a little bit about Pye Parr.
So Pye used to be the lead designer at 2000 AD. I've known him for a very long time. We're good friends, and he went off to have a very successful freelance career. And we were chatting. It was late night, I think on a Sunday or something like that, and we were chatting on Facebook, and we'd been going through the design process for the cover at work, which you know, I'd because of, you know, my job, I got to be in the room for that, which most authors never are in the room.
Right.
Because naturally sometimes they become a little precious, and being a precious little author, I was like, this isn't really coming together. It's you know, there's some good ideas, it's just not gelling in a way that I think works to the advantage of everybody. And I mentioned this to Pye, just apropos of nothing. And he said, I'll be back in a bit. And 20 minutes later, he came back with a concept sketch. And it was like, that's it. That's it. That sums up the book. And I what was really nice, we had the launch at Gosh Comics in London yesterday. And it was the two of us. And I was able to tell him to his face, because I've not seen him in person for a little while, how honored and delighted I am that he was able to do that, and how important to the book the cover is, because I've never, and this might be slight hyperbole, it might be slight exaggeration, but I don't care. I've never seen a cover sum up the contents of a book so immediately and so perfectly and so all-encompassingly. And you look at that cover and you immediately know what the book says. There's no ambiguity to it at all. You know, you have the image of the riot policeman, a figure that has become increasingly familiar on British and American streets over the last 40 odd years. And then you have that bifurcated visor painted onto the policeman's visor. It's stunning. He's an incredible artist. I think that's one of the best things he's ever done. Not just in terms of execution, but just knowing how it works.
From concept to execution, you're just like, that is just banger.
It's just incredible.
You have mentioned before that this book grew out of a series of interviews and features that you wrote for a Dredd hardcover collection series, which did not make its way to the States. We're not bitter about that at all. Whatever. Walk us through how you put this book together.
Really badly, and with a lot of crying. Basically, no. So. The hardcover series was a part works. Now I'm pretty sure you don't have these in America. They're very much rooted in British newsagents, so like newspaper shops, where you and this was a feature from even before I was born, where it's like first parties 99p, and then after like the third issue it goes up to full price, but you're kind of locked into the collection. It's specifically geared to like niche interests. So there was a wonderful like die-cast Star Trek collection that would come out every fortnight or something like that. And the Judge Dredd Mega Collection was basically one of those. So collections of key Judge Dredd stories. And I started doing the back matter for those, and I did peaks and troughs, but the ones that I really enjoyed were the ones where I got to bite down fairly hard into the ideas behind Judge Dredd and the themes, and it was suggested to me by Ben Smith, who's the head of books and comic books and film and TV at Rebellion, that it would make a book, and eventually I pitched something in about May, June 2020. So we're already deep into lockdown by that point. And just a little while before, George Floyd had been murdered. And, then President Trump is tweeting law and order, 10 exclamation marks, as these mass protests just asking for equality and justice erupt around the world. And I'd already started the reading by that point, and the pitch that I made was just about the politics of Judge Dredd. There was a chapter on, is he a fascist, and all this and the other. And just as time went on, this
one-word chapter. Yes.
Well, I mean, you say that, but there's always lots of people who want to debate me on that point. And there's actually I wrote a piece just to get it out of my head. I've got a blog on Medium. I literally did a post called "Is Judge Dredd a Fascist?" And one friend just messaged me, went no, and another friend messaged me and went, "Of course." And I was like, well, there we go. But the theme that just, I was reading a lot of criminology, I was reading a lot of social critique, a lot of history books, particularly about the 1970s when Judge Dredd began. And this theme of law and order really started to punch through. And the history of the police, particularly in Britain, but also in America, how those are intertwined, how they the ideology around policing, the mythology, the hegemonic forces that seem to make them an inescapable feature of modern life. These all came, and then I go back and read some of the complete case files, and just each story just chimed with the stuff that I was reading. I was like, I can't avoid this. Like, this isn't necessarily, I didn't set out to write a book about policing and Judge Dredd. That's the narrative that came through the more I read, reread of Judge Dredd and read of the current quite radical and fascinating theories around policing in the 21st century. And I have a messy brain. So I ended up writing chapter 4 first, and then jumped around. And there's a couple of points in the book where I wish I hadn't done that. But, and I'd get stuck in loops. And there's at least another 3 chapters worth. I wrote it all in Google Docs like an idiot. There's at least another 3 chapters worth of stuff that I started and spent weeks and weeks on, and then just had to ditch because I realized that actually it was dragging me away. Lots of themes that I realized weren't serving, were perfectly interesting and a critique of the strip, perfectly valid, but not necessarily supporting this general thesis. So, yeah, it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of tears. A lot of late nights because, of course, I'm doing my day job and writing the book as well. So, it wasn't easy. I think ultimately it was made easier by John Wagner, Alan Grant, Carl Sasquera, creating something that so perfectly sums up the times. Not just when he was created, not just that first golden age of the early 80s, but also now. And so the title of the book, How Judge Dredd Predicted Our Future. I was saying the book it's more projection than prediction, but for them to have been so politically and historically and socially astute, I mean, it's one of the most perfect satires, even in all its weird contradictions and inconsistencies, and which you get from a strip that's been weekly for 45 years, almost 46 years. I don't think there's as good a satire in comics, and I think, again, some might find this slightly hyperbolic. I don't think there's many satires like this that we've seen in literature.
Yeah, certainly the breadth and the scope of it. No one else has really had the canvas to do that. And 2000 AD has, for the most part, been pretty laser focused on this is what we're going to do with this character. I have so many different ways I want to go from there. The title of the book, Judge Dredd Predicted Our Future. Did it prepare us for the future?
That's a good question. I would say it should have done.
The sort of the second part of that question that I forgot to say was, and if not, should it have? So you're like, it should have. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it should have done. I think what you're always going to come up against is one of the limitations of satire, is that in order to satirize something, it must clothe itself in the garb of that thing. So Neil Gaiman in the Future Shock documentary that came out a few years ago talked about Dredd being the thing and the critique of the thing at the same time, and that carries with it an awful lot of pitfalls, because there are going to be people who read it who just take it at face value, who aren't necessarily being encouraged or stimulated into asking the searching questions for whatever reason. And the thing about Dredd is it's still good comics, even if you're not engaging with it on the kind of political level. So I think it's easy to sometimes miss the critique that's embedded into just the landscape and the furniture of the strip. So you can take an individual story and go, well, this is just propaganda. This is propaganda. Because look, the judges are really effective and they get their man and everything. Where's the satire? You go, well, the thing about the judges is that they are the embodiment of the great lie about fascism, which is, well, at least Mussolini made the trains run on time. The idea that when you see these hardline future cops who can effectively do whatever they want because they control the lawmaking process, not just enforce it, the narratives around law and order nonetheless project that idea that you may not like what they do, but at least they're effective. And of course, the judges aren't effective because there's still all this crime. Then no point do they tackle the root cause of it. And I'd make the point in the book that the whole thing about the Mussolini making the trains run on time was he didn't. It was a lie. It was a PR exercise to convince the somewhat gullible English and American journalists and I guess influencers of the time to talk about how great Mussolini's fascist state was, because look how clean and efficient the railways are, but they were only ever shown the clean and efficient bits. Right. they weren't shown the rest of it. So, but it's that lie at the heart of fascism, which is you may not like it, but it works. But of course, it doesn't. It never has. Right. It brutalizes people for its own ends. It can't protect them. And within authoritarianism, you have exactly the same idea that you may not like the fact that the police are beating people over the head, but at least at least things are nice and ordered and peaceful and everything. It's not. Force is not peace.
No. Is a reader in 2023 better or worse at picking out satire than a person from 77?
I don't know. Okay. Is the short answer to that question, because I think because there's so many different types of satire. So you can have really subtle stuff. You can have long form stuff. I think the satire that lands has always been what I would categorize as newspaper cartoon satire. So, and that's got a very long heritage of words, pictures with, I mean, you get them in America where it's like the donkey and the elephant, and
right, the political cartoons, like the one panel sort of.
There's a globe, and they've got like a bit of writing on it, just so that you understand what the allegory is that they're making. And that goes through all the way. Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing, that's reacting to the moment, and you go all the way through to things like the nib, which again is in that vein. It's what the satire is right there, because it's lampoon, and particularly in America, lampoon is I think a much bigger part of your modern kind of media landscape than in Britain. Although I mean that's a very sweeping statement, Michael. I mean there's always been lampoon as part of satire. I think one problem is that perhaps audiences now insist that their satire must be unequivocal. It must come down on one side of the argument or the other. It must be obvious.
Right.
Again, that's a sweeping generalization, but it can be difficult, and I've seen this reaction to Dredd, as I've already mentioned. Some people read an individual story and they go, "Well, this is propaganda," because Judge Dredd is shown to be efficient and incorruptible and all this. I don't like this, ACAB, etc. So I think actually a character like Dredd is a better type of satire, because it really does work, and I've said this before, it works as a Rorschach test. It either challenges your ideas of how things should be, or it reinforces how things should be, and can fall down on either side of that as well. So for some people, he's the exemplar of law enforcement. For other people, such as myself, he is a biting satire on exactly that kind of authoritarian law and order politics. So yeah, I don't think we've got any better. I think just the landscape has changed quite a lot, and having. I mean, you raise an interesting point about the kind of bandwidth that Wagner and Grant had to work with. 5 or 6 pages every week for years. You don't get that these days. It's got to be clear pretty quickly what you're saying. Within a season of TV, within 5 seconds on an Instagram feed, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't necessarily. We've got worse, but it's just different.
One of the things I've always found fascinating about Dredd is that it's written primarily by Brits. I know Wagner was born in Pennsylvania or something, but he's lived over on your side of the pond. Written by Brits for Brits, but it's set in America. It's commenting on America as much as it is the Britain that it's being written for. Given how different our sort of national personalities or our two cultures can be, were you surprised how much Dredd worked for both at the same time?
No, because I disagree that it's about America at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I say in the book it's always much more about here than it is there. It just uses the metaphor of America and the America of the British imagination as a means of reflecting back at us things that we know or we assume about ourselves. And Britain has always imagined itself to be much closer to America than culturally and politically and socially than I think Americans would ever acknowledge. I think sometimes I've encountered Americans who just don't see the closeness at all. We are just to some people I've talked to just another European country that just happens to speak the same language. So I think what really struck me is Kelly Kaneyama, who's a comics scholar who's written about, she's writing a book about the Punisher at the moment. She did her PhD dissertation on the transatlanticism of British comics. So looking at figures like Alan Moore, Garth Ennis, Mark Millar, Grant Morrison, and how you had those waves of the British invasion that came over to American comics, and to a degree how that has changed American comics. I very much, and I realize, of course, I'm going to say this because not only do I work for the company, but I've been reading 2000 AD since I was a kid. No 2000 AD, and you do not have modern comics.
Oh no, absolutely not.
Maybe things would have worked out this way without it, but that's very unlikely. No John Wagner and Alan Grant and Pat Mills, no Alan Moore, no Dave Gibbons, no Brian Bolland, and therefore no Neil Gaiman, no Grant Morrison, no Mark Millar. All these people have had such a profound effect. So I think coming back to your original question, I think what shocked me writing I Am the Law was just how perceptive, whether accidentally or by intent, writers like John and Alan and the artists they work with were about what was happening in the world. And they were reacting. John and Alan used to sit on beanbags on the floor of Alan's farmhouse in East Anglia, go through the papers and just have, essentially tell jokes and just exaggerate what was there.
Yeah.
But in doing so, they demonstrated this remarkable perception for the underlying sinew of what was happening. So and even at the time, they were slightly ahead of the curve. There's a whole chapter on block wall, which is these terrible, when you've got an incredibly crowded megatropolis, where people are living cheek by jowl in huge tower blocks right next to one another. They develop like tribal sensibilities, and war breaks out over the smallest of things. And that image of urban life as being one of extreme pressure began in the strip just before the great urban disturbances of the early 1980s. I start the one of the chapters with the riot in St Paul's in the area of Bristol, which was a very, very poor, very economically disadvantaged, primarily populated by second and third generation immigrants from the colonies, and there was a report. There had been a report into life in the inner cities of Bristol that was called "Endless Pressure," and John and Alan just create this image of hyper urbanization, and then once you hyper that, you then hyper the reaction to it, and it gets bigger. So the riots kicking off in Brixton, Moss Side in Manchester, in Toxteth in Liverpool, and as a kid, all of this would have seemed like absolute searing satire of what was happening right then. And even something like The Day the Lord Died, which was one of the first, it was kind of the second mega epic, first one wholly written by John Wagner, where Judge Cal becomes the kind of pseudo-Roman dictator of Mega-City One, and there's a whole page in there about how much more, come back to what we're talking about, how much more efficient the city now is, because it's ruled by fear. And that was published during the Winter of Discontent from in the late 1970s. And again, kids living in a world where the dead go unburied, the trash is uncollected in the streets, and all the while, the police are involved in these running battles with protesters and strikers. So it's like I say, it's a strip that uses the prism of America, and quite often America that Americans won't recognize because it's the one that lives rent free in our heads. So a land of excess, a land of bigness. Tom Shapiro did a kind of a pamphlet book called The Lawman for Panel by Panel.
Yeah,
and it's absolutely fantastic. Like, it's the perfect primer for understanding Judge Dredd. And he talks about everything in Dredd is big. The land, in that first page of Prog 2 in 1977, where Judge Dredd begins, the bike is big, the boots are big, the city is big, everything is big, because that's the vision of America.
Well, that's part of the American mythology. Like, we have the Expanse, we have the lone lawman, that is part of our psyche, for better and for worse.
Yeah. And you get a book like The End of the Myth by Greg Grandin, which won the Pulitzer 4 years ago, which is about the notion of the frontier as the basis of the American psyche. That constantly outward rolling frontier, which is a place of violence and blood and exploitation. And Grandin, he goes into a lot more detail than this, but he basically says, Trump and those who preceded him are very much an expression of how the frontier is now washed back onto America. So the border is now everywhere.
Right.
And I used End of the Myth as the basis for the fourth chapter, talking about Judge Cal and the mighty wall he builds around Megacity One, where all the guns and the cameras point inwards.
Mm.
And so, you know, it becomes a place that hums with the tinnitus of pain. And of course, the judges defeat Cal, and they don't. The only thing they do is they just turn the guns around, so they point outwards now. But the wall is still there.
Right.
The wall is still a place that hums with the tinnitus of pain and separation. So you know, it just, the more it went on, like I said, the more it went on, every story seemed to chime in some way. You know, you've got things like and I've mentioned this in other podcasts I've done, Lawmaster on the Loose, where one of the judges' bikes goes on this mass rampage, killing loads and loads of people. Dredd takes it down, and as he stood in front of this massive pile of dead bodies, you know, citizens who've going about their daily lives, who've been killed by the power of the judges, is a man clinging on to Dredd's ankles as he hangs over this mile-high precipice. And he says, "Oh, you're a good man, Judge Dredd. What would we be? What would we do without you here to protect us?" What incredible! Like, looking at what's happening in the West today.
Yeah.
What an incredible satire of the illiberal application of the state's monopoly on a force on its own population, that claims to protect the population that it brutalizes at exactly the same time. I mean, that's just incredible, and it's a joke. It's funny.
Yeah,
like, it's ridiculous. And the man's face, I don't know whether Ron Smith was the artist, and the guy hanging off Dredd's ankles looks a little bit looks a little bit like Alan Grant, who was probably, that may well have been, it was co-written between him and Wagner, but it may well have been more one of his stories. But just, that was in a kid's comic.
Yeah. You
know? And that kind of stuff is just incredible. And you take it all the way through to things like Origins, which came out in 2006, where Wagner finally visits what had only been hinted at, which is the origin of the judges. And of course, it's a story that the system is telling about itself. So actually, we should treat it with a little bit of caution. And spoilers, but at the end, he's talking to his clone father, Judge Eustace Fargo, who set up Justice Department, and this frail man says it wasn't meant to be forever.
Yeah, like, oops.
And all of a sudden, the previous 40 odd years, all of it is called into question. I mean, what an incredible achievement for a writer to do something like that. On the last page of this long story, where you're told the narrative of how the state sees itself by somebody who was there, and so you trust it, and it's Dredd, so of course he's going to be, you assume he's going to be impartial, all this, that, and the other, but then you realize it's all a lie. It's all founded on the fact that power only ever serves itself. And if you allow it to take over everything, it will never ever want to let go.
Yeah.
And so that's a searing narrative on how the illiberalism inherent in liberal democracy has to be held in check. It has to be held in balance with other forces. And what we've seen over the last 50 years with all this tough on crime politics and the law and order politics and the hollowing out of the state by neoliberal ideology leaves only the police as the force in society. And that's the satire of Judge Dredd.
Yeah,
is if you continue this process, all that will be left is a police state where they are responsible for everything from welfare to warfare.
You've done a couple of interviews for this book so far, and a thread that comes through in the questions is, if the strip has shown us this, does it give us any hope for the future?
Ultimately, the satire within Judge Dredd is that it's too late for his world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the warning, which is don't let it get to this point. If the timeline of the strip is to be believed, we're roughly a decade away from the judges being on our streets, like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much that kind of history is starting to marry up.
Right.
I think in terms of hope, the strip has various strategies for resistance. So you get a character like Chopper, Marlon Shakespeare, who embodies that kind of teenage rebellion that's grounded in individualism. He's able, when he becomes a sky surfer, so somebody who zips around on this floating surfboard, he embodies the survival strategy of flying away, of saving the self. The strip has repeatedly quashed democracy movements, and that's to do with the fact that if you and both John Wagner and Garth Ennis have said this, which is if you take away the city effectively as it is, then can Dredd still work as a character? And they say no. So I don't think it necessarily has a lot of hope in the strip, because at the end of the day, it's about one individual fascistic lawman in the future. He's the main draw. He's the main attraction. I think the hope comes from what it can inspire. And that is an awareness of as I've said, the sinews of law and order narratives, of not falling for its rhetoric. And we're at a critical stage at the moment, where the British government is effectively trying to remove our right to protest. And there will be people who say that's hyperbolic, and they're quite welcome to their opinion. But everything the Tories have done, and New Labour as well, let's not allow them to get off scot-free, was moving more and more rapidly to mass securitization of society, of the removal of the right to dissent and resist, the hollowing out of democracy. So actually, it becomes a sham, not unlike it is in Megacity One. But at this moment in time, the movements towards resistance, of defund, of abolition, of people with trying to remove the fingers of the authoritarian state from their communities, mutual aid structures, and it is really heartening. I mean, I can sit here as a white middle class guy and say there's lots of hope, but it's the people doing the work who are out there making it happen. And even in somewhere I live, like Oxford, where there's massive disparity between the richest and the poorest, it's one of the most expensive places to live in Britain. I see evidence of mutual aid and mutual support and people working together to try and improve things, at the same time as I see other things getting worse. So I think, to come back to your original question, I think sometimes hope can be the wrong thing.
Okay.
To hope to wish for, because hope can all too often minimize action. I've known plenty of people go, it's not as bad as all this, things will improve. And and as much as I want to hear good news about things, sometimes it can make you think, wait, I don't need to do anything. So actually, sometimes I think hope is the wrong thing. Action is the most important thing, and sometimes that will be grounded in desperation. Sometimes it will be grounded in a desire to make things better. But I think what the strip does, it just it shows us the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the warning of Judge Dredd, is that once you get to that point, when you put your trust in, being as you have alluded to, being a 17th century nerd, I referenced Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something of a a historical curio for me. But this figure of the all-powerful monarch, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Once you place your trust and your hope and your expectation in a figure like that, then you're at their mercy.
Mm-hmm.
So rejecting narratives that look for the strong man, that look for the figure who do the thing that you want them to do, and instead finding avenues for cooperation and mutualism and support. I think that's that. If one looks for hope, that's what the strip does.
Okie doke. I do want to try and maybe squeeze in one little bit about the strip and its longevity and how that can be a virtue. One of the stories that you obviously mentioned in the book quite rightly is America. It is exhibit A in terms of Judge Dredd is not somebody to look up to. Wagner's continuation of that story and the characters in that story with Judge Beanie and her coming from that, going into the Justice Department, wanting to change it from within in a way. And over the years, we've been able to see the system change her in a way that shows the perils of like how the system can corrupt even the most like idealized individuals, which isn't something you can really do in one story. That comes from bit by bit by bit, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later.
Well, America Beanie is a fascinating character, because you're entirely right. She's the without going too much into America, which is a whole conversation in its own right. Is the product of a morally bankrupt man who betrays the person he loves the most in the world again and again and again and again, and sees in his daughter the potential for redemption, and she's not, because he can't be redeemed, because she herself is a betrayal of her quote unquote mother's legacy. And you're entirely right that at the end of the last kind of America storyline, Bennett Beanie is dying, and he leaves America a letter saying, "I believe one good judge is worth more than 1,000 protest marches." And what I love about John Wagner's writing is that it's grounded in the structures and lessons and moral ambiguity of the noir tradition. So a lot of his favorite writers are people who did police mysteries and spy tales, and about characters who are fundamentally compromised, not just because of what they do, but because of who they are, and the landscape in which and how the landscape affects them and everything like that. So you get a character like America Beanie, and she hasn't changed anything, not really. Because what Bennett Beanie doesn't understand is she may be good, she may be the best judge, like they're just portrayed as incorruptible and caring for people and those things, but they're still serving a system that brutalizes people. So and this is one of the Dredd is a vision, a kind of what I guess you'd call a liberal vision of policing, which is that the system can be reformed. Like if we just hit on this perfect formula for the perfect machine to deliver impartial justice, whatever that is, but usually comes down to the application of violent force. then we can fix society. And that's not how you fix a society. There's a quote at the end of the book. I keep meaning to look up their name because I always forget it, but there's a very famous quote from a particular criminologist who basically said, the police don't stop crime. They don't prevent crime. The police know it. The government knows it. Criminologists know it, but the public do not. The police are there to maintain order. And, you know, we live in a time now where they barely even solve crime. You know, conviction rates in this country for rape are like 1.5%. And so, you know, you like, who is being protected? What good is one good person in a system that is failing, that is that seeks to suppress the voices of people who ask for something more, for something better? And you know, that's the satire at the heart of Judge Dredd, which is he is this for all of his rhetoric about justice and order and things like that. What he does is he maintains a status quo that helps nobody. And it's something I'd love to see explored more with America Beanie. You know, and to a certain extent, it's already been done with Judge Anderson. With Alan Grant's stories through the 1990s. So beginning with something like, beginning with Childhood's End, through Shambhala, Satan, and her kind of wanderings off into the cosmos. In fact, it goes further back than that. There's a story called Triad, where she encounters a couple of very powerful psychic twins, and effectively acts as like mother, but is still bringing them into a system she knows abused her, because you know, and her best friend Judge Corey commits suicide. She's an empath, and she commits suicide, and she says good people shouldn't do ugly things. And you know, so Alan Grant has explored that concept of can you do good in a bad system, and I think there's yet to be a reckoning with America Beanie for that, because is she actually changing anything, or is she bringing a veneer to a brutal system, and as you point out, a system that has fundamentally failed? You know, hundreds of millions of citizens are dead. Like, they've not been protected by the judges. Yeah. And it's such a vivid metaphor for where we are now, where we're facing existential cataclysm, because of a system that will not slow down. Not only will it not stop, it won't even slow down. In fact, it's accelerating, because it can't stop itself. You know, the free market and the profit motive is too great. So, you know, effectively our police are being asked to stop us being able to say no to something we know will destroy us. And if you look at Megacity, I say in the book, really the story of Judge Dredd is the decline and fall of Megacity One. It doesn't matter how incorruptible or good or whatever Judge Dredd is. Not only has he not been able to stop an awful lot of these cataclysms, he's been responsible for an awful lot of these cataclysms. But the judges insist on, you know, hanging on by their fingernails. There's a very famous quote. I use this in the book. A very famous quote from a politician called Nye Bevan, who was one of the socialist architects of the National Health Service and the welfare state. And he talked about fascism being the future refusing to be born. And Megacity One and Dredd's world is effectively our world, but held in stasis. You know, just on the brink of collapse, and it's just held there by this iron will, because that's what the system knows, that it won't survive that fall.
Right.
But in doing so, it perpetrates daily acts of violence upon its own citizens, while not solving the problems that leave them exposed in the first place.
The worst of all worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dredd's an incredible expression of liberal faith in policing, of the failings of policing, the consequences of what the criminologist Robert Reiner called police fetishism. The idea that the police, as they are a natural part of the order of things, and that no other system can replace them. You see that whenever you start having a conversation about things like defund or abolition, it's like people will immediately react, going, "Well, what about if you're being mugged in the street?" Well, to be quite frank, if I'm being mugged in the street, already the police aren't going to be there. So
yeah, the police don't show up until after. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah, but law and order rhetoric, the thing that forms the core story of the book, when challenged, will always place you into the role of the victim. So there's a very famous moment in a story called Twilight's Last Gleaming where the citizens are being asked to judge the judges, to decide in a great binary referendum that will never be repeated again. And you've definitely got to stick to the will of the people. And like, what a concept! What a silly concept. And Dredd's being interviewed, and he says, if you're being attacked in the street, who do you want to see rock up, me or your elected representative? So he places the listener in the position of victim, and then creates a straw man argument where it's like it's just a politician who we are, not exactly a particularly revered and honored class of citizen, or me, the strength that can protect you. And of course, it's all this fiction, but it's designed to elicit an emotional response of fear, and that's what law and order politics is. It's the politics of fear, and Dredd is just a wonderful dissection, a nuanced and ambiguous dissection. Coming back to the point about satire, I think it's what many people don't understand about him is that just because there's nuance and ambiguity there doesn't mean that the strip is coming down on his, the judge's side all the time. It's much more clever and difficult, and is asking something of the reader. Even as you're enjoying the story of him hitting somebody over the head or shooting that criminal, it does ask that question: why are you enjoying this?
It's a wonderful strip, thought-provoking, exciting. There are so many things about it, like Sensitive Clegg or Noam Chomsky. Like there's a talking alien alligator that quotes Shakespeare.
A perfect example. Come back to what we were talking about, elements of hope, and it's not necessarily, they're not figures of hope,
right?
But Chomsky is just a take on Chopper, in the like I said, Chopper was all about individualism and escape, whereas Chomsky is much more a figure of mutual aid, because he's he looks after his neighborhood and his friends, and does what he can to protect them, and that's that much more speaks to our moment, I think.
Again, it is a wonderful book, a wonderful balance between comics history and this diving into, political history and sort of law enforcement history and stuff. It's a weird balance to be able to do, and I think you do a really good job of it.
Thank you.
And again, there are wonderful 2000 AD Judge Dredd stories that you can read that don't make you have to grapple with these sort of things. It's we've talked about them on the show. We will continue to do so in the future. It looks like we are out of time, but Mike, thanks for coming on, for talking about this book. Thanks for doing the book, and I look forward to talking to you more about all the 2000 AD thrill power that we are going to be getting in the years to come.
Wonderful, thank you, and huge thanks to you and to Mike and everyone at Multiver-City for the support you've given 2000 AD over the last decade. It's hugely appreciated.
Oh, it's our pleasure.